all right to answer those?
Yep. Thank you for those questions outside. Should we change the governance structures? We went through a huge amount of governance changes a couple of years ago, which is I hate changing the NUS constitution. It's really difficult. But in this case, I'm sure you're not going to feel sorry for me. I'm not sure whether it's a constitutional change or whether it's just about enforcing the accountability and the culture that should already be there, because these organisations, they're not independent, they are autonomous, and the things that I will always defend about these campaigns, they're about bringing together students who define into those campaigns, who tackle and face common discrimination. I think it's important that they come together, they debate the issues that are of particular concern to their education, their welfare, their outlook, and they set the policy direction, they elect their officers, they elect their committees. I think that kind of autonomy is really, really important. That kind of self-organisation is really important, and I would never want to encroach on that. But clearly, you can't have it both ways. You can't, claim to be autonomous, but then try and be sort of completely independent, because we've seen the consequences of the actions of those autonomous officers and the language they chose to use today, and ultimately, as a point which I do kind of labour at them from time to time, the affiliation fees that are paid to NUS, which fund their campaigns, are paid for by students' unions, which include everyone, and there has to be some accountability to the centre there, as far as I'm concerned, and an accountability to people collectively as officers whose salaries, whose campaigns, whose resources are paid for by NUS. And again, I'm happy. I've listened to what people have said about accountability today. I've listened to what people have said in terms of, particularly the point was made about measures and what are you going to do. And I will take that back and have a discussion. We will certainly discuss it at the next meeting of the NUS National Executive Council at the beginning of March, because I know many members of the NEC are very exercised, not least the one who spent quite a considerable time in Durham just before Christmas making the case to NUS. And on the Human Rights Act and about free speech. You get into real philosophical territory with this, because no rights and freedoms are absolute, because what you can't do is use your rights and freedoms to impinge on the rights and freedoms of others. And if you take the Equality and Human Rights Commission, for example, which is responsible for enforcing it, on the Equality and Human Rights Commission, you have a very controversial evangelical Christian. You also have representatives of the LGBT community. He said stuff which incenses this lot. Should his human rights be protected? Should he have freedom of religious expression? Of course he should. But sometimes there'll be tensions, and so I think that's kind of one of the things that's at work here. But secondly, and I know this is a point people disagree about, I honestly don't believe that no platform policy is somehow an anathema to free speech, because as far as I'm concerned, if Nick Griffin wants to stand on a street corner, or anyone else that matter, they can. But free speech is not an absolute right, because it's even regulated within the law even now. There are certain things, there are certain incitements that you cannot perform. There are certain things you cannot do. But for me, again, it comes down to where membership organisations, we can decide who we let in. And for me, that's the central point about no platform policy.
Wes, you tried to present this idea that there's two issues here. There's non-racism on one hand and free speech on the other. But can't you see that the actual principle that underlies it is that freedom should be for all? Not for the few at the expense of the many, nor for the many at the expense of the few, but for all good people. That's the reason I don't like the BNP, because they're a factional party that attempts to promote what they see as being in the interests of one group, broadly speaking whites, at the expense of another, certain ethnic minorities. That's nasty politics, it's gutter politics, it's the politics of the playground bully. Why can't you oppose it?
Yeah, in the red top.
Our Education and Welfare Officer received quite a threatening phone call, and I understand that the NUS supplied the number to the Anti-Fascist Party. Why? Why would you hand that out?
Just a matter of clarification on that. It was our Equal Opportunities Officer. Laurie, do you want to?
Yes, shall I quickly? It was a regional organiser from Unite Against Fascism who got hold of my contact details after I, the Race Awareness Officer, wanted to organise a Hope Not Hate, Love Music, Hate Racism type event. So I contacted them before. My contact details were then passed on to the regional organiser. I just think last minute it was just.
Yeah, so it wasn't NUS actually that passed that on, it was United Against Fascism. Right.
Just mention on United Against Fascism, I think that they weren't unique in getting phone calls and threatening communication from them. We've had threatening phone calls to the office. Personally, I've received threatening emails. They've emailed sort of all of the staff in the university. They're the ones that sort of got the NUS riled, and local media with my personal email address. They threatened to storm the chamber and I think they stormed the BSU at one point, getting
stormed
muddled up.
a slight exaggeration, but yes,
But yeah, just on that, it's not unique to that, and I think there needs to be a wider discussion on Unite Against Fascism, and maybe on whether your no platform policy, which is meant to include everyone that incites violence, ought to include Unite Against Fascism, which currently. Officially signed up as a signatory to their founding statement, and I'm slightly uncomfortable.
Yes, as maybe as well storming, we had members of Unite Against Fascism come into the building, and they spoke to one of our sabbatical officers, the duck manager. They also lied to reception about having permission to put up posters using Laurie's name, but that is an organisation separate to NUS. We'll take Anna as a question, so that's 3. Should we go for one more? Yeah, you at the back.
What has the NUS learnt from a previous occasion where it tried to cancel a debate involving the BNP in St Andrews in 2005, given that St Andrews wasn't actually affiliated to the NUS at the time at all?
Case in the NUS Annals where, yes, as historians say, it's not my period. On to the stuff, in terms of Unite Against Fascism, NUS is a signatory to the founding statement of Unite Against Fascism. We do a lot of work with Unite Against Fascism. One of our vice presidents is speaking on my behalf at Unite Against Fascism conference this weekend. Unite Against Fascism is an organisation that's incredibly active, as well as working with its sister organisation Love Music Hate Racism, to try and organise effective anti-fascist activity. They will be out leafleting doors in constituencies up and down the country where the BNP are particularly active, and they do campaign against fascists wherever they choose to speak. If there are people who have acted officially on behalf of Unite Against Fascism, who you feel have threatened you as a student, or anyone else who've been involved in organising debates, then please do write to me, because as an affiliate of Unite Against Fascism, we will take that up. I mean, in terms of I'm not saying write to me to make your complaint, because I've heard your complaints, I'll take it back anyway, but in terms of particularly where you've had emails or anything like that, then please do pass them on, because your welfare and other people's welfare is just as much concern as anyone else's.
UAF attacked members of in a anti-fascist house like Oxford Union. UAF committed violence. Why are you still affiliated with them?
Okay.